The whole rare earth mineral deal was supposed to guarantee America's support for Ukraine.
Would be open to restarting dialogue with President Trump and is ready to sign a critical minerals deal with the U.S.
Now, the plans for a minerals deal are being finalised. It seems as though Volodymyr Zelensky will be at the White House on Friday. He may well be there to sign them. All strong rumours, according to a variety of anonymous sources. Donald Trump saying the deal would mean Ukraine has the right to fight on. 3 senior Ukrainian officials saying that framework has been agreed with the hope that they will ensure the continued flow of US military support to Ukraine.
I hear that he's coming on Friday. Certainly it's okay with me if he'd like to, and he would like to sign it together with me, and I understand that's a big deal, very big deal. It could be $1 trillion deal, it could be whatever, but it's rare earths and other things. And look, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine and Russia fighting a war that should have never, ever happened. That's a war that would have never happened if I were president. I will be meeting with President Zelensky. In fact, he may come in this week or next week to sign the agreement, and which would be nice. I'd love to meet him. Would meet at the Oval Office. So the agreement's being worked on now. They're very close to a final deal. It'll be a deal with rare earths and various other things, and he would like to come, as I understand it, here to sign it, and that would be great with me.
Donald Trump wants to generate a little bit of money in terms of, in return for all of that aid that's been given by the US. But in part, it's because Ukraine has been providing lots of information about potentially exciting minerals they've got under the ground. This is a mineral map of the country. And if we just zoom in here, in particular, there's one place, a deposit here, it's a former Soviet deposit going back to the 1970s, where they say there's a lot of rare earth. Now,
Ukraine sits on $12 trillion worth of the rarest minerals needed to power technology, including lithium and titanium. It could be a rival to China, the world's biggest current supplier. And that's interesting to the US, which is wary of China's rise globally. The famously transactional US President Donald Trump says he has found the deal he wants to make with Ukraine to help end the war.
So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're
giving them weapons and aid in return for rare earth materials. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is open to the idea. Russia, for its part, says the arms for minerals deal, as some have dubbed it, is a sign of the US slowing down their support for Ukraine. But with that much money involved, Ukraine is clear. No development of resources until the full end to the war and complete Russian withdrawal.
Ukrainian strategic resources only after the end of war. And we can do it only when the territory of Ukraine will be deoccupied, when it will be liberated, because many of such resources right now are located in the territories occupied by Russia.
A senior US official says the minerals deal makes no promises about future security guarantees for Ukraine. That's a key issue for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who spilled out his red lines ahead of the talks. He said the deal will not repay any money the US has given to Kyiv during the war so far. And he said he wants to clarify if Ukraine can still count on US weapons deliveries. The Ukrainian leader considers the deal only a framework, but Mr. Trump says Kyiv has every reason to sign it.
The minerals agreement will provide the basis for a more sustainable future relationship between the United States and Ukraine, and thus stimulate the long-term prosperity that will help the Ukrainians rebuild their country. It's been demolished.
It was, at first, Ukraine's idea. President Zelensky selling their mineral wealth in November, perhaps too successfully, as part of a victory plan for more aid. Showing reporters' maps here. They claim 7% global production of titanium. Lithium isn't mined yet, but they say they've 3% global reserves. They say they're in the top 5 of graphite reserves and have some actual rare earth metals. The initial framework deal doesn't specify what it covers, mentioning only relevant resource assets that will be further described in another agreement.
Rare earths are a group of 17 metals that make magnets used in electric vehicles, cell phones, missile systems, and other electronics. They're called rare earths because they lack meaningful substitutes, and they include lanthanum and cerium, used in TVs and lighting, neodymium, used in wind turbines and EV batteries, erbium and yttrium, whose applications range from nuclear power to lasers, lithium for glass, ceramics, and batteries used in electric cars, graphite for battery vehicles and nuclear reactors, titanium, uranium, beryllium, manganese, gallium, zirconium, apatite, fluorite, and nickel and scandium, among others, that remain classified.
Rare earths are a group of 17 metallic elements with obscure names such as lanthanum and terbium. They are actually relatively plentiful in the Earth's crust. However, their geochemical qualities mean they tend to be widely dispersed, making them relatively difficult to mine and process profitably, hence the name. As a group, they tend to have high melting and boiling points, but it is when they react with other elements that they become really useful. In fact, they are indispensable for many electronic, optical, and magnetic applications, and currently irreplaceable for modern devices such as electric vehicles and mobile phones. They are also vital for the defense industry.
Rare earth elements, it's a term used to describe a group of 17 metals, most of which most of us never heard of. China mines most of it for the world's technology industry, more than 95%. The rest is being mined in the United States, in Estonia, in India, in Malaysia, and in Brazil in South America. Those are just a few of the countries where the metals can be found. Mining them is not only complex but also costly, so many countries are cautious. That may change, however, as demand for these metals is rising. They're a key to the production of a long list of modern-day technologies, like smartphones, like electric and hybrid cars, like common computer monitors and televisions, even military hardware.
Ukraine has 22 of the 34 rare earth minerals identified by the European Union as critical. Some of these minerals are essential for some crucial industries such as defense, high-tech appliances, aerospace, and green energy.
Well, by some estimates, Ukraine has $10 trillion worth of mineral deposits, and this includes a wide range of materials and minerals that are really crucial for any modern economy like the US's, both in terms of civilian things and also for the military. Let's go through a list of some of those crucial minerals. Titanium, for instance, before the war, Ukraine produced about 7% of the world's output of titanium, and this is used in airplane construction, in power stations, so it's very important. There's 19 million tons of proven reserves of graphite, and there's also lithium, both of those used in electric vehicle batteries, so very important as we transition to a greener economy. Ukraine represents about a third of Europe's deposits of lithium. There are minerals like gallium and germanium, which are used as essential components in making semiconductors, microchips, which are essential in any tech-based economy, especially when you're developing artificial intelligence systems. And finally, there's the rare earths, which we talk about a lot. These are 17 rather obscure elements that are used, that are essential as well in the production of semiconductors. And Trump said that he wanted to get $500 billion worth of those, at least in the first iteration of the deal.
But here's the issue. When you look at how much in the way of rare earths there might be in Ukraine, it doesn't even scratch the surface. This is showing you global reserves of rare earths from China through to Brazil, India, Russia, Vietnam, and the US. The US actually has quite a bit of rare earths in the ground, but there's no Ukraine anywhere there, and that's partly because it doesn't really have much, even if you take into account that's resource in the ground, bearing in mind the idea that you can actually get it out of the ground economically. So maybe it's not rare earths, maybe it's other things like lithium. There is quite a big lithium deposit in the central Ukraine belt here. However, big by European standards, but if you put it against other kind of mega lithium reserve countries like Chile, like Australia, like Argentina, and even if you assume the best case scenario for Ukraine, it's still relatively small compared to the rest. It's not game changing. And again, look at the US. The US has more lithium, considerably more lithium than most other countries, including Ukraine. So it might well come back to, if the US wants to generate some extra money with these resources, it might come back to traditional stuff like coal. There's a lot of coal in Ukraine, not though as much as there is in America. There's lots of iron ore as well, again, ditto. Titanium, quite a big supply of titanium there as well, and uranium too. So maybe it's the traditional resources that could feed into this fund and might bring back some money, but it will be a long time before you actually see that coming into fruition.
And the problem is that no one actually knows how much rare earth there is in Ukraine and where exactly it's located. There is a certainty that there is some, but this is based on Soviet-era exploration and surveys that date from decades ago.
Worth pointing out is that Ukraine does not report any commercially operational rare earth mines. At the moment, China, with whom America is embroiled in a trade war, is the largest exporter of rare earth minerals, hence being the backbone of some of the biggest industries in the world.
While we're talking about China, it's important to know how they're central to the story of rare earths and anxiety over supply. China controls by far the biggest share of the world's rare earth reserves, but there's also a high concentration of them in Vietnam. Brazil and Russia also control a substantial amount. However, when it comes to actually refining and processing, China is even further ahead.
Now, rare earths are really important. They're in a suite of elements in the periodic table. They're used in magnets, they're used in military applications, so they matter a lot. And right now, the reason this really matters for the US, right now, most rare earth mining is dominated by China. So that's China in terms of the mining dominating the global supply. When you think about refining those rare earths, so actually getting the rare earth out of the ground is pretty easy. Turning it into something you can use in a magnet or whatever it might be, that's really hard, and China also dominates that 90% of rare earth production. So you can see the attraction here. If the US feels they can get those rare earths in the Ukraine, well, maybe that might solve this.
Controlling most of the global trade in rare earths gives China enormous strategic power, and that's something Beijing is fully aware of. 3 decades ago, China's then leader, Deng Xiaoping, was quoted saying, "The Middle East has its oil, China has rare earths." Rare earths have become a source of geopolitical contention because of how key they are to different countries' technological ambitions and now also to their climate protection objectives.
China dominates the supply chain, and as relations between the US and China deteriorate, Western countries fear they don't have an alternative, which could have serious implications for the future of manufacturing. Half a century ago, the Mountain Pass mine in California was the world's leading source of rare earths. But a successful push by Beijing to become the global leader in the sector means it now produces about 80% of the world's rare earths.
How did China come to dominate the rare earths trade? Let me take you back to 1949.
One of the very first industrial projects that was prioritized by the newly founded People's Republic of China was actually building a vertically integrated heavy industry and military industrial complex around the iron and rare earth reserves in Bayan Obo. And so with a lot of investment from the former Soviet Union, a lot of work over a couple of decades, China built up a really robust industrial foundation and also sent experts all over the world to Europe, to Russia, to other parts of the world to gather expertise and then to come back to China and help crack the puzzle of how you better refine and produce alloys with rare earth elements. This was now we're in sort of like the 70s. And then Deng Xiaoping comes along and does the open up and reform and starts selectively requesting and attracting foreign direct investment in specific sectors in China. And this happened to be right around the time when Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the West removed capital controls to make it easier for Western firms to look for places that had the greatest competitive advantage, the lowest labor costs, and of course the least amount of regulatory burden.
You're looking at the largest deposit of rare earth minerals in the world. 17 metals with names such as scandium, yttrium, and the lanthanoids, needed for the everyday technologies we use, from mobile phones to cars. Without this mine, modern life as we know it wouldn't exist.
Mining rare earth minerals is dirty business. So dirty, in fact, that countries with the minerals, such as the United States and Australia, decided against digging for it, thinking that the costs outweighed the benefits. After all, if China was willing to do it, they thought we might as well let them.
That was a happy arrangement until earlier this year, when China started reducing export quotas.
But some of China's trading partners would learn the hard way that dependency from one side translates to leverage for the other. Back in 2010, technological powerhouse Japan accused its gigantic regional rival of deliberately withholding rare earth exports. The subsequent row with China saw the prices of some rare earths increase 30-fold.
Then, amid a territorial dispute with Japan, the world's biggest buyer, reports emerged that shipments were being held back.
100%. 100% of our rare earth minerals come from China.
That's Yoshio Inagaki, president of Daido Electronics, a maker of magnets that go into laptops. His company and many others here depend on the steady supply of rare earths from China. Without them, their operations come to a complete halt. And what Japan has realized is that complete dependence on China is no longer an option.
An aggressive stance and disrupted supply means higher prices, and therefore inflated costs all the way down the chain and more expensive products in your hands. That would also slow down the uptake of green technology. But experts warn that the global economy being as interlinked as it is means that the race for rare earths defies characterization as a simple winner-take-all story.
More recently, in 2020, concern that China would use rare earths as a bargaining chip in its ongoing trade battle with the United States saw then-President Donald Trump sign an executive order boosting funding for domestic mining. The US imports almost 80% of its rare earths directly from China, and it's heavily reliant on China for the processing of the rare earths mined in America, in its one and only rare earth mine, Mountain Pass in California. And efforts on the part of, say, Europe to expand its network of suppliers is running into complications.
The sharp deterioration in relations between the US and China is fueling concerns that Beijing could cut off the supply. In July, China threatened to impose sanctions on Lockheed Martin, the biggest US arms manufacturer. This has prompted the US, Australia, and the EU to step up efforts to create an alternative supply chain. Currently, there is just one major non-Chinese supplier of rare earths, Lynas, an Australian-listed company. But Lynas can only handle the so-called light rare earths at its Malaysian processing facility, leaving Western companies totally reliant on Chinese suppliers for heavy rare earths. In July, the Pentagon provided funding to Lynas and US-based MP Materials to design heavy rare earth processing facilities that could be based in the US. The US and Australian governments have also signed an agreement to source new rare earth deposits to boost security of supply. The task of establishing a non-Chinese supply chain will not be easy, however. Even though rare earths are relatively abundant, the process of separating them poses technical and environmental challenges. China's dominance of the market enables it to control prices and put pressure on challengers. Beijing's Made in China 2025 strategy is to create a vertically integrated supply chain that dominates mining, magnets, and high-tech manufacturing, such as electric vehicles. But an increasing number of Western experts say this is exactly why the West needs to begin producing its own supply of rare earths, and also the high-performance magnets required to power the digital age.
So just explain to us then why the US and Donald Trump is so interested in them.
Oh, as we mentioned, those are all very important for any high-tech, modern economy, but this is also happening in a context for the U.S. where there's this huge technological and geopolitical rivalry with China, and both of those countries are really struggling to get a dominance in tech here. And the U.S. has really sought to curb China's access to key semiconductor technology to try and blunt China's advance in terms of tech. And in response to that, actually, China has banned the export of its own gallium and germanium to the U.S., which would help produce semiconductors. So having access to new deposits of those two metals to produce semiconductors would be helpful for the U.S. because China produces 94% of the world's gallium and 83% of the world's germanium. And obviously there's the argument in Trump's internal logic that he wants to recoup the losses he believes the U.S. has incurred by aiding Ukraine in its war, defending itself against the Russian invasion.
It therefore makes sense why America is interested in Ukraine's rare earth minerals given America-China's trade war. Although Ukraine has a slightly experienced labor force and some infrastructure, investors highlight some serious barriers when it comes to investing in Ukraine, including complex regulatory processes, difficulty accessing geological data, and high startup capital, which would see investors investing for years before reaping the benefits.
$500 billion, that was the sum that President Trump initially thought Ukraine might be able to pay back to the United States, in his words. And here you get a sense of the challenge, really, because this place, potential is certainly there, but they say they desperately need investment. These machines are so old, and yes, so they say they would welcome American money.
The pressure to get money out of the ground is enormous, as are the questions as to whether the astronomical sums Trump thinks are here can match the money to be made under this sprawling sea of unknown potential.
And then there's the issue that China, as you can see here still dominates the processing of critical minerals around the world. 100% of the world's graphite has to go through China to be refined and processed. Just under 90% of the world's rare earths, just under 60% of the world's lithium. So it really goes to show that even if the US has access to new deposits of critical minerals in Ukraine, those might have to go to China anyway. So that dependence will be really hard to shake for the US. And on top of that, many of those minerals in Ukraine are located in Russian-held territory. According to Ukraine's economy minister, $350 billion worth of critical minerals are in areas that are currently occupied by Russia, which would make exporting them that much more difficult.
Ukraine also has significant coal reserves that were used to power the steel industry, even though most of the reserves are located in the area currently being controlled by Russia.
The biggest commercially viable rare earth mineral deposits are also in the territories Russia has annexed and where the worst of the war rages. They include Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia. Together, they are worth $6 trillion, or 53% of Ukraine's rare earth mineral deposits.
The mine is in the self-declared Donetsk Republic, in the coal-rich Donbas region. It used to fuel the Ukrainian steel industry before 2014, when Russian separatists took control of the area. Now, the majority of the coal deposits are within territories annexed by Russia.
These wagons carry coal from the mining area to the cage and to the mountain. It's our coal that we mine. It is a valuable quality that's used in steel production. Firstly, coke is made out of it, and then metal is made. It's in demand.
It's an inhospitable place to walk, with minimum safety standards. But for the men walking here, it's their entire life, their bread and butter. Too noisy, too deep for them to catch the sound of shell fire above.
I've been working in mining for 31 years. It's very difficult to work here because there is not enough manpower. Most of the young men were mobilized. We go back to the city where our families wait for us under artillery fire.
We are patient. We are Russian people. We have our own Russian spirit. We have to endure to feed our families. The boys are fighting for freedom there, and we are mining coal here. That's why it is necessary to raise Donbas from its knees. That's how we live. Our education is shovel and coal.
This coal mine produces over 200,000 tons of raw coal a month. All of it is destined for export. Coal prices hit a record of over $400 per ton this year. While the price has subsided, demand is still high as the war in Ukraine has no end in sight.
Just 6 months ago, at the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow, commitments were made to phase out coal globally. But the war in Ukraine has upended that. South African coal miners, such as this one, are benefiting from record coal prices as well as a significant rise in orders from European countries, eager to plug the gap left behind by Russia.
Canyon Coal runs 4 mines across the country and, like all South African producers, are benefiting from the boom and at times struggling to keep up with demand.
After COVID pandemic lockdowns, the economy started
like restructuring and then restarting the economies. And then we had this issue between Russia and Ukraine. That is the biggest actually reason for the resurgence, because Russia is a big supplier for European markets, 136 million tonnes per year. So that coal now stopped. As of August 10, there will be no Russian coal going to Europe. So that means that Europe needs to get coal from somewhere, and then they mainly come to South Africa and go to Colombia to buy the coal.
US perhaps a little too eager to take. Ukraine with no choice but to give. In a hugely complex deal that may get messier still when it runs into the cold, hard ground truth of where Ukraine is at today.